Haumea, thank you for taking the time. I have been excited to talk to you and reconnect with you for a very long time. Thank you for being here.
Shelley, it's such a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you so much.
For those people listening, we had the great honor to attend a retreat together, and I got to see the magic and the essence that is you. And you have the ability to see and feel and work through energy with people like almost nobody I've ever met before. And you're doing some incredible work now in the world, unlocking traumas and getting people unstuck and releasing patterns that people have tried. In some cases, for more than decades to release and just couldn't for whatever reason. And so we're going to get into all of that, but I'm wondering if you could start with where did all of this start for you at the very beginning of your story? How did you end up being the person that's healing lives and changing lives and allowing people to live into their full and true and most beautiful potential?
Oh, Shelley, the beginning, back in the womb.
Wherever it started for you.
So for me, my earliest memories start at about 4 years old. And I was what would be considered a very highly sensitive child and an empath. So I felt all the energy around me and especially the emotions of other people around me. And there were a lot of strong emotions in my family. Um, and so I was the peacekeeper and very quiet. And in fact, these emotions and energies overwhelmed me so much that I was pretty much mute until I was 11 years old. I had a ritual every night where I would recall the words I said, and it would usually be on one hand, always two hands or less.
Wow.
And not only I would recount those words, like the responses or the things I said, I would be banging myself over the head. It's like, no, I shouldn't have said that. I said it wrong. I was so upset with myself. So I would say I was on the autistic spectrum. Um, Life was very dreamlike to me, and I couldn't fit in with other people. I was always steps behind or steps way far in advance, but never like quite in tune and in step with everyone else. It's like I was always hearing my own drummer. And people were thinking, who is this queer, weird kid? I mean, even my parents, I think, thought that and couldn't really get a grasp on it. But in the meantime, I was having conversations with invisible, beings that were invisible to other people. And I may see them or not, but a lot of times it would be through nature. And I was inquisitive. I would ask questions, why are humans like this? What's going on with this? How come they go to church on Sunday and they act like this on Monday? And what is this thing about love when people say they love you, but it hurts? So um, those questions would get answered. I would have either, I would say, probably the voice of God, spirit directly, or in nature, it would show me the answers or give me the answers through an animal, a cloud, a tree, whatever it was. But I was constantly having this conversation going on from a very, very young age. And the few times I did share little sentences with other people, it freaked out the adults so much that even more so I didn't speak. And I have an older brother who's deaf. And so it almost at that time with my sensitivities, it seemed like if he can't speak, if he can't hear the language and communicate freely, why should I be able to?
Mm.
So I did a lot of things in my life of if they don't have it, why should I have it? If they can't, enjoy this, why should I be able to enjoy it? So it was a lot of trauma, a lot of trauma getting stuffed down in there.
Totally. Did you feel guilt for the words that you spoke? Like what was coming up for you during the day when normally kids your age would be speaking and yelling and laughing and communicating. What was coming up for you in those moments? Were you a shy, kind of like sullen child, or was there guilt around the fact that you could speak but your brother couldn't hear you?
I would say it was more of walking on eggshells. I was so afraid of making a mistake,
Mm.
saying something wrong, or saying something that might hurt someone in some way. And so it was more, I think, out of that fear of doing something wrong and making a mistake. The guilt came at night in bed. It was like I felt so guilty for having my hearing when he didn't. And then I would go into gratitude. I'm so grateful to have a roof over my head. So grateful to have my hearing. But it was that conflict, grateful and guilty. The words themselves, I wouldn't say I was sullen, but I was very, very sad. And so I was very quiet, introverted. I would observe. And sometimes I was just in my own world. Like I just didn't quite fit in. But and I think that's the thing. So other kids are yelling and playing, and I just couldn't quite fit in with them. Once in a while, there would be one or two kids that I would become friends with, and we would sort of quietly have our communion. And it was like a soul connection. We were comfortable with each other, but the majority I was not comfortable with, and they weren't comfortable with me either. So really didn't know how to insert words and insert myself into a situation.
Totally. Well, what happened for you when you transitioned into adolescence? That's a challenging time for people under best circumstances. What did that look like for you?
Definitely. I actually said a prayer when I was 11. And the prayer, because up until that time, I truly felt like I was carrying the world on my shoulders. It was such a burden. I could feel all the emotions. It felt like the emotions of humanity and the sadness and the suffering of humanity. I really felt that. And every night I was having dreams of being um, in Vietnam or in a like situation. So I rarely slept either. It was like having two lives. At 11, I said a prayer. It was, God, I don't want to feel all this anymore. Can you please make it stop?
Mm.
And I don't know what made me say it, but I remember saying it. And I remember waking up the next day and I wasn't feeling everything that I was the prior 11 years or how long I remembered. So that shifted things. And then I started talking more to other kids, had a couple of, had a best friend that we did things together. And somehow I was able to, integrate a little bit more. I felt a little bit more present. So yeah, adolescence was also very difficult because that's when you so want to belong. And I could see how I didn't. So my life has been this composite of belonging and not belonging. So I could sort of fit in with a lot of different groups. I never had like my one group. Like they would sort of, allow me to be with them kind of thing. And at the same time, I didn't have that feeling of deep belonging. Yeah.
Totally makes sense. But it's sometimes your not every gift comes wrapped in a bow, I like to say. Sometimes the thing that is most challenging in a situation later on, when we can see over the fence and we realize there was more to the story than we knew, or more to your purpose or your calling, what we find is those perceived hardships, and not perceived hardships, definitely hardships in the moment, but they become the seeds that are planted for a greater gift that grows. What did that look like for you?
So for me, I already had this deep spiritual connection with God, spirit, universe, great spirit, and with nature. And I could communicate with the unseen worlds in that way. So that was an incredible gift and continues to be. And then also, because I was observing so much, I had deep compassion for other people. It's like I could sort of see beyond however they were acting at the time, I could see what, led them to that place. And,
Mm.
um, and so that was a great gift. Yeah. And then also just trying to figure out life. Why are we here? What's it about? And one of the biggest gifts was a BS meter, seeing through the marketing, the lies, the conditioning, and just, people, things that people would just accept as that's just the way it is. I would see it and question it. It's like, well, that doesn't make sense. It's like, you're saying this is a good thing and it obviously isn't. So what's giving here? And, so seeing a lot of that from a young age was a great gift.
Well, it's incredible when you have a filter to cut through the noise like that, particularly when, say, a person's treating you in a certain way and you have an emotional reaction to however they've spoken to you or treated you, to be able to have enough humanity and compassion to see the root of the wound is utterly incredible, particularly in those moments. So no surprises whatsoever that you ended up doing the work that you're doing, and really kind of honing in on the imprints that we all experience going throughout our lives. Can you talk about that, and what is trauma for those who hear the word and maybe have a certain connotation of that, and what does that actually mean to us in relation to how it impacts us and how you have now solved for that?
So trauma, it's a big word. I think even the word itself includes the energy, so we can actually feel it and understand it just from the word itself. To define it a little bit more, many people describe trauma as the stories, what they went through, the actions, the feelings they had. On the other hand, I describe trauma as an congealed or a stuck energy in the body. So it's like an energetic pattern that gets stuck. And yes, there are feelings, there are experiences associated with it. But basically, that stuck energy is sort of like how beaver builds a dam in a river. And so there's these dams, these trauma dams built in our bodies, and they're blocking the flow. And it forces all the other energy incoming into that same pattern to accommodate for that
Mm-hmm.
dam in there. And so these trauma blocks that we have, they're not necessarily all from our own life. We also have trauma blocks from that were inherited from our parents, our grandparents, and on from our lineage. We have trauma blocks from past lives. We have trauma blocks from our culture that we live in, from the patriarchy, from the distorted masculine, distorted feminine. And then there's also trauma blocks that I believe have been placed upon humanity to stay in trauma.
Mm.
Because what happens with trauma, and the reason why I researched it so deeply, is even though I had these understandings and this great BS meter, it was like I was hypnotized. I would go in certain modes with people and relationships that were definitely unhealthy for me. And yet I had such a hard time breaking those patterns. And so I looked at that for myself and my clients over decades. What is it in the change process where we can get to a certain point and yet come up against that wall where we start repeating an old pattern again, and we don't seem to get beyond it? And every time it came back to one of those trauma dams or blocks or congealed energies, patterns stuck in our bodies. And so it can be chronic illness that we can't get past. It can be a relationship pattern we can't get past, being with a narcissist, or not allowing ourselves to truly love and receive love. It can be with money. Maybe there's a ceiling on our income, or debt. We're chronically in debt, and the worry about money is chronically there. So those are some of the patterns that I see. And having the trauma block released, for instance, with your health, once that trauma pattern is released from your body, it gives the body space so that our innate and natural healing abilities can come on board. And then our body can bring us back into homeostasis and balance and optimal function.
Wow, that is so much to unpack. I just wanted to circle back on a lot of the people who listen are women. Many are coaches, authors, speakers, entrepreneurs. And I've noticed this, and it's interesting you say this, so I'm just going to repeat it back because I feel like this perspective might be helpful for the listeners. So you were talking about experiences causing trauma and them getting embedded or imprinted or calcifying on you and blocking the flow of energy. I've noticed particularly with women, and you touched on the patriarchy as well. I've noticed with women, there are millions of grains of sand moment. You're not big enough. You're not brave enough. It's not safe to be in the spotlight. You see what happens, to other people who are in the spotlight and are not perfect, how they get torn down. And, you even made mention of this as well. But I think in those moments when these women have that calling where it's like, oh, I want to do that thing. And in their body, it's like a hell yes. And it was actually you at the retreat. You said it's that nanosecond when your body tells you the truth. That actually came from you. But you have that nanosecond when your body tells you the truth and you're like, oh, that's a yes. But in an instant, all of these grains of sand come flooding down and you find yourself on a beach and it's not even your beach. So you find these incredible human beings saying yes to things they should be saying no to, saying no to things they should be saying yes to, but also not wanting to let go of that hope, come love nor money, because in many cases it's the first time they felt it. Mm-hmm. So how that can manifest is, barking up the wrong tree or just, running headlong into a brick wall over and over and over because you still have the hope of what's possible if you get past it, instead of actually pulling the weed at the root. I remember a guy named Dr. Matt Accurso was on the podcast a while ago, and he was talking about generational trauma or observational trauma. And the example he gave was they had a female dog that came in and had been hit by a car, and she was pregnant. So they saved the dog's life. They were able to save the pups as well, but unfortunately the dog's hind legs were paralyzed, and so she would walk with her front legs and drag her back legs. Now, all of the puppies were perfectly healthy, and every single one of them learned to walk by dragging their hind legs, even though there was absolutely nothing wrong with their hind legs. For those of us who are experiencing this or a version of this, where would you take us next in terms of what is the solution? What does uncovering the problem look like? And what is the work you're doing now in the world to help free these people?
Oh, Shelley, that's such a great example of what can happen with trauma. Even if it doesn't happen to us personally, it's still imprinted in there. And science is even showing this, how this is imprinted for generations in our DNA. So it's a great question you ask. What I do is I work with the energy. And so I'll bring in a few terms that some of your listeners may not be familiar with. I actually work with teams, healing teams and clearing teams that are a lot of my unseen friends in the unseen realms of the highest realms. So I'm very particular, I'm very meticulous, precise, and surgical with the work that I do. And it's got to be of the highest, purest energy. And I say that a little bit cautionary because I know channeling is very vogue, if you will, right now. And, people are exploring their spirituality, which is wonderful. And at the same time, there are voices that can come in that are not of the truth. It can give you a little bit of truth and then, lock you into something else that's untrue. So recognizing that, I just want to say these teams are at the highest integrity and light and love, very close to source. And they, with me, with the person and people I'm working with. So for instance, I have a 13-week trauma series that's been developed now of awakening beyond your trauma. And so the teams come in and we're co-creating with everyone's soul. as well. So everyone's helping to participate with this. What's needed? What kinds of clearings do we need? And so we're going about that. For instance, the first week, which was this last Wednesday, we cleared 3 generations of trauma that was held within the 3 generations of ourselves, our parents, our grandparents. And it happens on an energetic level. We may not know the stories behind it, but the reports coming back from people is, I cried starting at minute, whatever, and just tears flooding and so much relief. I feel like, this weight's come off my chest. I can breathe better. I'm sleeping better. I drank so much water, more water than I usually do in a week. And it felt like it was just clearing things out with this river of water. And I'm seeing lights that are luminous and beautiful. So it works on an energetic level. I also go in, and some of the clearings I will direct if I detect, for instance, that there is something that is coming from a curse or a spell from someone. It's like, all right, let's take care of this curse or this spell. Sometimes it's a belief. Sometimes it's in the unconscious. Sometimes it's part of what we've adopted as our identity. Sometimes it's a covenant that's been made. So I'll look at all these different areas where it could have assisted in congealing this trauma block and help to release it.
So powerful. So this is done virtually because I want to talk a little bit about your 13-week process. So if people are interested, first of all, is it still open for people to join up and participate?
It's still open. Sometimes spirit, when spirit asks me to do something, it's like, do it now. So I have a very short window. This was one of those. So I had a very short window. The cart was only open 3 days or 4 days before I started the first session. So it's open until, just feeling into this because it feels like it just shifted. It feels like it's open until the April 15th, which is next Friday. And then we're closing the container for this round. And then this is probably the only live round that will do it. So it's very exciting as it's happening. And the numbers of teams coming in, usually when I have a one-on-one with a client, maybe one team will come in and work with us and help with the clearings. Sometimes up to 5 teams, which is a lot. So this last week, we actually had over 20 teams that came in and were assisting. Some of them were assigned specifically to individuals. Every individual participating has someone assigned to them within these teams. So it's magical, it's powerful. I'd say this is the most potent work that I've done, and it's very exciting.
That says a lot. So you were talking earlier about beliefs, and so I want to touch on who is this for and how will they know. And so I want to, before I ask you that, go back a little bit and talk about beliefs and what beliefs are. The thing is, when we are feeling negative or stuck or heavy, and to be honest, these days, a lot of times that will result in depression or anxiety or just feeling like you're not living your purpose, or what's the point of all of this and going through the motion day by day. Oftentimes we will have what we believe is our truth about what the world is or isn't, or our perspective. But really that comes down to the beliefs or the precognitive commitments that we have made, oftentimes from the time we were a little kid, things that we've seen, those grains of sand that we were talking about. How does somebody uncover what is a belief and what is a truth so that they know whether or not this is for them?
That's a great question. And it comes down to discernment. And honestly, this is one thing I'm teaching during this series also, is I'm giving many tools for our toolbox so that we can have that discernment of what is truth and what is mine, what is not mine. When we stay in our head, that's the easiest place to get confused and also to be manipulated and influenced. And so I do exercises bringing people's energy and consciousness into their heart and even lower into their body, because it's through our body that we know the truth, through that nanosecond, um, and longer. The more that we are in our body and not disassociated or just in our head bubble, we have the filter of our heart, which filters what's true and what's not true, and what works for us and what doesn't work for us. So that's why it's so important to bring even our thoughts into our heart, from our head into our heart. And then it can be filtered, and we can actually feel a response in our body of what's true and what's not. So as far as this course, whether it would be beneficial for one of your listeners or not, the population that I especially focus on and work with are magical, sensitive, magical sensitives or highly sensitive people, and empaths. So those are really my peeps. The people that, so highly sensitive people, it's been found, are 20%, about 20% of the population. And so 80% of the population is the majority, and that's who creates most of our systems and who this world is mostly created for. So then you have 20% that could be on a spectrum of how sensitive that this world isn't really built for. And we need to learn how are we designed and what works for us, so that we can put into place the practices and the ways of knowing that work for us. So somebody listening to this, mostly people just have a resonance. They're like, I'm a yes. They just feel it, like, I'm a yes. And they don't have to debate it in their head. There is something, their spirit, their soul, their body is just going, do this. This is for us. So that's what I would say about that.
What has been one of your most memorable transformations? When people are trying to envision, what does it look like or feel like to work with somebody who's able to move trauma, when maybe something, a situation isn't something that they would have self-identified as trauma, but now as a result of listening to you today are thinking, wow, you know what, that actually now makes sense. What are some of your most memorable transformations or experiences with somebody who was feeling a certain kind of way before, or their life looked a certain way, or their results were a certain way, and the shift that is possible for people when they come along?
So the story that is coming up first is from a dear friend, whose son came to a session, and her son is very highly sensitive. He's a teenager. And for about a year and a half, he had been feeling this oppression, this pressure on his chest. So it made it hard for him to breathe. And he was so aware, he even knew, he would say, I know this isn't mine. I know this isn't mine, but couldn't figure out what to do with it. And if they had gone the regular traditional medical route, they probably wouldn't have found anything either, but probably would have put him on some kind of meds. We had one session, and we were doing it virtually. The mom was actually watching him as we were doing the session. And so this stuck energy there that he could sense was not his, it was able to be released. And she could actually see him when he was able to actually breathe again, take a breath, and feel, and she could see just from his posture that this energy just lifted off of him. And it was very concerning for him. Like it was kind of, he felt sort of this depression, and like he wasn't quite himself. He couldn't feel himself. He couldn't feel his feelings well. And through that session, it's like he was able to connect back with himself and become more himself again, and be free, be liberated. So I call these liberation clearings, because that's what they are. They help liberate you to being your true self in your divine design. So that's what I would share.
It's interesting when you have been in a situation or an environment for a certain length of time, you almost numb to it. And in many cases, I've observed it almost It almost presents like a low level, tolerable amount of despair. And you don't realize how thirsty you are until you're able to take a sip. And then you're like, oh, there it is.
Exactly. You have no idea. You may have an inkling that there's something up. I don't feel really alive. My life isn't feeling very magical right now. I'm not really feeling all that much, except for this low level, whatever it is. But I'm making do. And then once it's lifted, and like you said, you take that sip of water and you realize you've actually been in the desert and you just have no idea until afterwards what you had been tolerating and surviving at the time. Yeah.
Well, I've had experience in my life where I have been in just flow, where it's, things are magical and you're like, oh, I have an idea. And then you pursue it and something incredible happens. And people are like, how did you make that happen? And there isn't really an answer except for you're in flow. I've also had contrasting experience where there was something that I really genuinely wanted to have, wanted to achieve, and I was just like efforting and efforting and efforting and just couldn't make it happen. So if you are able to return people to that flow, to that state where it's just they're co-creating, what an absolute gift that is. If people are looking to join you and be part of this program, where is the best place they can reach out to work with you, to reach out and contact you, or to jump in on this program while they still have time?
I would say go to Linktree. My Linktree URL has the link for this program, as well as how to contact me and some other free resources. So that would be linktr.ee/sovereignsoul.is. So SOVEREIGNSOUL.is.
Amazing. And we're going to put that in the show notes as well. Haumea, thank you so much for coming. It is always a gift to be in your presence, and I couldn't love you more.
Love you too, Shelley. Thank you so much.